The rain was relentless, hammering the windows of my small upstate New York apartment like it wanted to break in and confess something. I stood at the sink, washing dishes, when I saw him, Daniel, my 59-year-old neighbor, struggling with a ladder in his backyard, soaked to the bone. His wife, Margaret, was away for the month, visiting her sister in Florida, and something about his hunched shoulders screamed a loneliness I recognized too well. I'm Isaac, 28, a graphic designer who moved to this quiet suburb of Rochester to escape the chaos of New York City, and a string of relationships that left me feeling like love was a language I'd never learn. That afternoon, watching Daniel wrestle with that ladder, I grabbed my jacket and ran out, driven by some instinct I couldn't name. "Need a hand?" I called, my voice barely cutting through the storm. Daniel turned, his silver hair plastered to his forehead, his blue eyes sharp yet weary. "Isaac, you'll catch your death out here," he said, but his smile was grateful, almost desperate. We dragged the ladder under his porch, and he invited me in for coffee. That was the beginning, when the walls between us, built by age and circumstance, started to crack. Inside his home, the air smelled of cedar and old books. The living room was a museum of a life well lived. Framed photos of Daniel and Margaret, a wedding picture from decades ago, her sharp-eyed gaze dominating every image. Daniel poured coffee, his hands steady but his voice unsteady as he talked about the storm, the house, anything but himself. I noticed the way his fingers lingered on the mug, the way his eyes darted to mine then away, like he was hiding something too heavy to share. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" he asked suddenly, his voice low, like a confession slipped out by accident. I froze, the mug halfway to my lips. "All the time," I said, and that was the first thread that tied us together. A shared ache, a quiet rebellion against the scripts we'd been handed. Over the next few days, I found excuses to check on him. A leaky faucet, a flickering porch light. Each visit peeled back another layer of Daniel. He was a retired architect, a man who designed homes for others, but lived in one that felt like a cage. Margaret, he hinted, was more a business partner than a spouse, their marriage a contract of convenience stretched across 30 years. "She's a good woman," he said once, staring at the floor. "But she doesn't see me. Never really did." I told him about my own life. Growing up gay in a small Ohio town, the whispers behind my back, the boyfriends who promised forever but left after a season. Daniel listened like every word mattered, his eyes softening in a way that made my chest ache. One evening, as we sat on his couch with a bottle of wine, he admitted he'd always wanted to paint. "Never had the courage," he said. "Too busy being what everyone expected." "Then paint now," I urged, leaning closer, my heart pounding. "You're not out of time, Daniel." He looked at me, his gaze lingering too long, and I felt the air shift, something unspoken, dangerous, and alive. The next day, I brought over a canvas and paints, a gift from my own art supplies. We set up in his backyard, the autumn leaves a riot of red and gold around us. He laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, as he smeared paint across the canvas, his hands trembling with excitement. I watched him, this man who'd spent decades hiding, come alive under the weight of a brush. And when our hands brushed as I handed him a tube of blue, the touch lingered, electric, like a secret we both knew but couldn't say. By the end of the week, we were spending every evening together. I'd cook dinner, badly, and he'd tease me, his voice warm, his eyes brighter than I'd ever seen. One night, as we sat under the stars, he told me about his youth, about a boy he'd loved in college, a boy he'd let go because the world wasn't ready. "I wasn't ready," he corrected, his voice breaking. I reached for his hand, and he didn't pull away. That touch, his hand in mine, changed everything. It was like we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross, and neither of us wanted to. But the weight of it, the forbidden pulse of it, hung heavy in the air. Daniel pulled back, his eyes clouded with guilt. "Isaac, I'm too old for this," he whispered, but his fingers tightened around mine, betraying his words. I didn't push. Not then. Instead, we kept up our routine, painting, talking, sharing pieces of ourselves we'd buried for years. I learned Daniel had grown up in a strict Catholic family, where love was a duty, not a feeling. He'd married Margaret because it was expected, because it was safe. "I thought I could outrun who I was," he said one evening, his voice raw. "But you can't outrun your own heart." I told him about my last relationship with a guy named Ethan who'd promised me the world but left when I asked for commitment. I'm tired of being someone's phase, I admitted, my voice cracking. Daniel reached out, his thumb brushing my cheek, and for a moment, I thought he might kiss me. But he didn't. He just held my gaze, and it was enough to make my heart race. The neighborhood started to notice our closeness. Mrs. Callahan, the nosy widow across the street, raised an eyebrow when she saw me carrying groceries into Daniel's house. "Helping out, are you?" she asked, her tone sharp. I shrugged it off, but I could feel the eyes on us, the whispers forming. Daniel brushed it off too, but I saw the tension in his jaw, the way he glanced at Margaret's photo when he thought I wasn't looking. One afternoon, while we were raking leaves, he told me about his college love, a boy named Thomas. He was fearless, Daniel said, his voice distant. He wanted us to run away together, to San Francisco, where no one would care. But I was a coward. His eyes met mine, and I saw the regret etched deep. "I don't want to be a coward anymore, Isaac." That night, we sat on his porch, the air crisp with October chill. I brought a blanket, and we shared it, our shoulders touching. "What are we doing, Daniel?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away, but his hand found mine under the blanket, his fingers threading through mine with a quiet certainty. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I don't want it to stop." The next day, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was from Daniel, written in his neat, architect's handwriting. "Isaac," it read, "you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, hope. But I'm scared, not of you, but of what this means. Meet me tonight by the old oak in the park. I need to tell you something." My heart pounded as I read it, a mix of joy and dread. I spent the day distracted, my mind racing with possibilities. Was he ready to face this? Was I? That evening, I walked to the park, the old oak looming like a sentinel under the moonlight. Daniel was there, his gray blazer sharp against the night, his face a mix of resolve and fear. "Isaac," he started, his voice trembling, "I've spent my life hiding. From my family, from Margaret, from myself. But when I'm with you, I feel alive." He stepped closer, his hand reaching for mine. "I don't know how to do this, but I want to try. For you. For me." I didn't think. I just closed the distance between us, my lips finding his in a kiss that felt like coming home. It was soft, tentative, then desperate, years of longing poured into a single moment. When we pulled apart, his eyes were wet, but he was smiling, a real, unguarded smile. That kiss was a spark, and it set everything ablaze. We stumbled back to Daniel's house, hands clasped, hearts racing, the world shrinking to just us. Inside, we sat on his couch, closer than ever, our knees touching, our breaths uneven. "I've never done this," Daniel admitted, his voice low. "Not like this. Not with someone who sees me." I cupped his face, my thumb tracing the lines etched by years of silence. "I see you, Daniel," I said, and we kissed again, slower this time, savoring every second. But even in that perfect moment, I felt the shadow of Margaret's absence, the weight of a life he'd built on compromise. The next morning, reality crept in. Daniel was quieter, his eyes flickering with doubt. "What happens when she comes back?" he asked over breakfast, his voice barely audible. I didn't have an answer. I wanted to say we'd figure it out, that love could conquer anything. But the truth was Messier. He was married. I was the neighbor. And the world wasn't as kind as our backyard sanctuary. Still, we couldn't stay away from each other. We spent every moment we could together, stealing time like thieves. We'd drive to a diner an hour away, where no one knew us, and talk for hours over greasy fries and milkshakes. Daniel told me about his dreams of designing sustainable homes, of leaving a legacy that mattered. I showed him my sketches, designs for apps and websites, and he'd critique them with an architect's eye, his praise making me feel invincible. But the whispers in the neighborhood grew louder. Mrs. Callahan cornered me at the mailbox one day, her eyes narrowed. "You're spending an awful lot of time with Mr. Harper," she said, her voice dripping with suspicion. "People talk, Isaac." I forced a smile, but her words gnawed at me. What were we doing? Could this last? Daniel felt it too. One evening, as we painted in his garage, he stopped mid-stroke, his brush hovering over the canvas. "I'm afraid," he said, his voice breaking. "Not of loving you, but of losing everything else." I wanted to reassure him, to promise we'd be okay, but the fear in his eyes mirrored my own. Then came the call. Margaret was coming home early. Her sister had recovered faster than expected. Daniel's face paled when he hung up the phone, and I felt the ground shift beneath us. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight. That night, we sat in his living room, the air heavy with unspoken questions. "I can't keep lying to her," he said. "But I can't lose you either." I took his hand, my heart pounding. "Then don't," I said. "Tell her the truth. Tell her who you are." He looked at me, his eyes searching mine, and for the first time, I saw something new in them: resolve. "I need time," he said, "but I want to be honest. For once in my life." The next day, I helped him draft a letter to Margaret. It was raw, painful, a confession of a life half-lived. "I've been hiding who I am," he wrote, his hand shaking as he penned the words. "I found someone who makes me feel alive, and I can't pretend anymore." I watched him seal the envelope, my chest tight with pride and fear. The letter sat on Daniel's kitchen counter for 2 days, unopened, like a bomb waiting to detonate. He wasn't ready to send it, not yet, and I didn't push. But every moment we spent together felt borrowed, like we were racing against a clock we couldn't see. We clung to each other, our touches desperate, our kisses laced with the fear of an ending. Margaret's return loomed closer, and Daniel grew quieter, his smiles rarer. One night, as we lay on a blanket in his backyard, staring at the stars, he turned to me. "If I do this, Isaac, everything changes. My home, my reputation, my family. Am I selfish for wanting you?" His voice cracked, and I pulled him close, my lips brushing his forehead. "You're not selfish," I said. "You're human." The next day, I found him in his study, staring at a photo of him and Margaret from their early years. "We were happy once," he said, his voice distant. "Or I thought we were. But I was always pretending, even then." I sat beside him, my hand on his knee. "You don't have to pretend anymore," I said. He leaned into me, his head resting on my shoulder, and for a moment, we were enough. But the world doesn't pause for love. Mrs. Callahan's gossip had spread, and soon, neighbors were whispering about the young man always at Daniel's house. One afternoon, a man from Daniel's church stopped by, his face stern. "People are concerned, Daniel," he said, glancing at me like I was a stain. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny anything. "Thank you for your concern," he said coolly, and showed him the door. That night, Daniel was restless, pacing his living room. "They'll never understand," he said, his voice bitter. "They'll see me as a sinner, a failure." I grabbed his hands, forcing him to look at me. "You're not a failure," I said fiercely. "You're the bravest man I know." He kissed me then, hard and urgent, like he was trying to drown out the world. The next morning, Margaret called again. She'd be home in 2 days. Daniel's face was a mask of dread, but he nodded when I asked if he was ready to talk to her. We spent those 2 days preparing, rehearsing what he'd say, how he'd explain a truth he'd buried for decades. I stayed by his side, my heart swelling with pride for his courage, even as fear gnawed at me. The night before Margaret's return, we sat on his porch, the air heavy with the scent of rain. "Whatever happens," Daniel said, his hand squeezing mine, "you've given me something I never thought I'd have. A chance to be me." I kissed him, slow and deep, pouring everything I felt into it. Love, hope, fear, everything. When Margaret's car pulled into the driveway the next day, my stomach twisted. Daniel met her at the door, the letter in his hand. I watched from my window, unable to breathe, as they disappeared inside. Hours passed, and I heard nothing. I paced my apartment, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if she hated him? What if he backed down? The silence was torture. I waited all day, checking my phone, glancing at Daniel's house, but no word came. By evening, I couldn't stand it anymore. I walked to his door, my heart in my throat, and knocked. Margaret answered, her face unreadable. "Isaac," she said, her voice clipped but not hostile. "Come in." Daniel was in the living room, his eyes red-rimmed, the letter open on the coffee table. Margaret sat across from him, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly. "I told her everything," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his face. "About me. About us." Margaret's gaze flicked to me, sharp but not cruel. 30 years, she said, her voice low. "And I never knew." "Not really." She stood, smoothing her skirt, and looked at Daniel. "I need time, Daniel. I don't hate you, but I need to understand. She left the room, and I heard the front door close softly behind her. Daniel sank onto the couch, his face in his hands. I sat beside him, my arm around his shoulders. She didn't scream, he said, almost to himself. I thought she'd scream. I held him, my heart aching for the pain he'd carried, for the bravery it took to face it. You did it, I whispered. You were honest. The next few days were a blur. Margaret moved into a hotel, saying she needed space. Daniel was a mess of relief and guilt, torn between the freedom of his truth and the wreckage of his marriage. I stayed close, cooking meals, dragging him out for walks, reminding him he wasn't alone. One night, he showed me a painting he'd finished, a vibrant abstract of blues and golds, chaotic yet beautiful. It's us, he said, his voice soft. Messy, but worth it. The neighborhood gossip reached a fever pitch. Anonymous notes appeared in Daniel's mailbox, calling him names I won't repeat. I wanted to confront every one of them, but Daniel stopped me. Let them talk, he said. I've spent too long caring what they think. His strength, quiet but unyielding, made me love him even more. We started talking about the future, tentative at first. Could we make this work? The age gap, the judgment, the uncertainty, it was daunting. But every time I looked at him, at the way his eyes lit up when he laughed, I knew I'd fight for this. For him. One evening, we drove to Lake Ontario, the water shimmering under the moonlight. We sat on the shore, our hands entwined, and Daniel told me about his dreams, not the ones he'd buried, but the ones he wanted now. A small house, maybe, where he could paint. A life where he could love openly. With you, he added, his voice barely audible, and my heart soared. Weeks passed, and Margaret reached out. She wanted to meet, not to reconcile, but to talk. Daniel was nervous, but I saw the hope in his eyes, a hope for closure, for peace. They met at a quiet cafe, and when he came back, he was lighter, like a weight had lifted. She's filing for divorce, he said, his voice steady. But she doesn't hate me. She said she wants me to be happy. It wasn't easy. The divorce proceedings were slow, the neighborhood gossip relentless. But Daniel faced it all with a courage I admired more every day. He started painting again, his work bolder, more vibrant. He even joined a local art group, where he met others who'd lived in the shadows and found their way out. I was proud of him, prouder than I'd ever been of anyone. We moved forward, together. I introduced Daniel to my friends, a tight-knit group of queer artists who welcomed him like family. He was shy at first, but their warmth drew him out, and soon he was laughing, sharing stories, his hand resting comfortably on mine. We found a rhythm, dinners at my place, mornings at his, quiet moments where we didn't need words. One spring evening, 6 months after Margaret's return, we stood in his backyard, the same place where it all began. The air was warm, the stars bright above us. Daniel took my hand, his eyes shining. I never thought I'd have this, he said. A chance to love, to be myself. You gave me that, Isaac. I kissed him, my heart full. You gave me that too, I said. And I meant it. Loving Daniel had taught me that love wasn't a script, a checklist, or a deadline. It was messy, imperfect, and worth every risk. We didn't have all the answers. The world still judged, and there were days when doubt crept in. But we faced it together, two men who'd found each other against all odds. Daniel's paintings lined our walls, a testament to a life reclaimed. And as we stood there, under the stars, I knew we'd keep fighting. For love, for truth, for a future we'd build together. The neighborhood still whispered, but their voices were fading. We were louder, our laughter, our love, our story. And that was enough.